It was 1 o'clock in the morning on August 15th when Kira Zaistava landed at Orlando International Airport. She'd been in the air and traveling for 24 hours. This was her first time away from home and her first time in the United States. And these people greeted her. The fellow in the blue shirt is a friend of mine, and he lives in DeLand, Florida, where this young woman was going. So I got in touch with him and I said, I know this young lady from Belarus that's headed in your direction. Would you greet her when she shows up in DeLand to go to Stetson University? I've known Harlow for probably about 40 years. We went to church together. We were members of Rotary, and now he's in the Rotary Club in DeLand, Florida. Now, if you look at that picture, what you see is Kira in the middle, and Harlow with the blue shirt on, and three women. Those three women are also in Rotary. And you're thinking, Brett, why are you sharing this with me? It's because it's connections that made this happen. Those four people greeted Kira. They treated her to a breakfast after she'd been traveling for over 24 hours. And then they gave her a tour of town. And they also then took her to her dormitory and helped her get settled in a dormitory. I was so impressed with it, I wrote a story about it. It was in the Lincoln Journal-Star. It was about connections. I got to know Kira because I mentored her earlier this year through the Moonshot Pirates program. She's from Belarus. I had barely knew where Belarus was, and I didn't know her but when I first connected with her. And also in that mentoring session, there was a young lady from India and a couple of guys from different countries in Africa. But Kira, part of the mentoring was, what are your hopes and desires? And she said, Randy, I want to go to the United States and go to college. And I thought, oh, sure. You live in Belarus. You want to come all the way to the United States to go to college? That's a lot of money. It's a lot of work. I'm not sure this is going to happen. But every time I met with her, she talked more about it. And eventually, she ended up applying for the universities here in the United States. Now, why do I tell you this story? It's because this story happened because of connections. And I'm worried about the connections that we don't have in our society. For example, and I don't mean to pick on African-American churches, but that church picture in the upper left-hand corner is a Mother Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Philadelphia. It used to be an active church. 4,000 people were members, and it would be packed on any given Sunday. It was the birthplace of the Black Protestant tradition. It was where civil rights movement was incubated, and any African-American or Black leader who wanted to be a leader, they would go there to kind of pick up on how to do it. Today, look at that picture. Barely 100 people show up at that church. And as I said, I'm not picking on Black churches. It's true in almost every church and every synagogue and every place of worship in the United States. Look at the graph on the right. Since 1980, had a significant drop. Church participation is in decline. So what else? When I first moved to Lincoln 45 years ago, worked at the University of Nebraska, I was in a bowling league. You think, oh gosh, come on, Brett. Yes, I was in a bowling league. That was part of the fellowship and the connection that helped me get to know different professors and different people across the university. We had a lot of fun. You have bowling leagues today? This is something that's more common. We are bowling alone. Now, the bowling world is still thriving, but people come in on their own and bowl. The reason I bring this up is because there's a fellow that has written a book, and he's titled it Bowling Alone. His name is Robert Putnam. And he observed that the United States and indeed much of the world is beginning to become separated. There's another example. Take a good look at this picture. Look at the empty seats at the tables. This is actually a Rotary meeting. I'm not going to tell you where. It's not here in Lincoln, but it's a Rotary meeting. And that's indicative of club membership across the United States and indeed in other parts of the world. We're not participating in clubs and organizations like we once did. So I share these three examples with you to give you an idea of something that I think is a problem in our society. Marshall Ganz is an educator and an author, and he actually still teaches at Harvard University. He says the root of many of the world's problems is our disconnection from one another and from our natural surroundings. I've already mentioned Robert Putnam. He talks about bonding versus bridging. Now, I've got some volleyball players here in this class. I've got some soccer players in the class and a couple of football players. And you folks I've observed are very close to each other. That's bonding. It's when you bond when you have something a lot in common. You're from the same socioeconomic background, the same race, the same geographic place, whatever. That's bonding. Bridging is when you connect with people that are different from you. David's from Mexico, and I hope that some of you have really gotten to know David because he's from a completely different country, different background, and different upbringing. That's bridging, when you connect with people across those lines that we have. This isn't new. 100 and some years ago, our country was very, very divided like it is now. We had political polarization. Have you heard that term? I heard it last night several times on television. You'll hear it today. We had social dislocation, inequality, cultural narcissism. How many times have you heard that word? I hear it over and over again. You know what they blamed? Look at that. Technology. Now, 100 years ago, what technology did they have? Electricity and radio. And they blame technology for their problems. Do you hear that today? Blaming social media. That's technology. They blame prosperity. Americans are too well off. We need to scrap a little bit more. They blame it on material well-being. Those are all things that they struggled with 100 years ago. But 100 years ago, something interesting happened. At the turn of the century, a guy by the name of Paul Harris moved from Southern Illinois to Chicago. And as he sat in his office, he was an attorney, sat in his office and he thought, I don't know the guy next door. I don't know the guy across the hall. I don't know these people that are in this building where I'm working. So he started asking them to meet for lunch. And pretty soon there were several of them, and they would go to each other's offices for lunch each week. That's where the term Rotary came from. And no, I'm not trying to sell Rotary to you. What I'm trying to talk about is connections. But after just a couple of years, that Rotary Club in Chicago, which is the oldest now in the world, had 200 members. After, I don't know, 4 or 5 more years, there were Rotary clubs in every major city in the United States. And this is back in the early 1900s. Look at that flag in the lower right-hand corner of the picture. It says Lincoln on it. I'm a member of the 14th club in the world. There are now more than 40,000 Rotary clubs worldwide. And as I said, I'm not trying to sell you on Rotary. I'm just talking about this social movement that happened 100 years ago. There were Kiwanis clubs formed back in those days, Lions clubs, Optimist clubs. People bowled together. They were active in their churches. But one of the reasons that Rotary and those other clubs took off like they did was they had what's called sociability in a box. They had instructions on how to form a club. They had mission statements and a code of ethics and things that made it easy to do. So what's happened in our society? We'll go back to Ganz for a minute. He says that one of the roots of our problems, first of all, is we're not connected. And because we're not connected, we are out of practice of coming together, of committing to one another in pursuit of a shared purpose. 100 years ago, we were a me-oriented society. People were individual. I want to live in my big house. I want a college degree. I want to make a good job and make a lot of money. We were me-oriented. As we began to get together and connect through organizations and clubs, we became more we-oriented. And that's the picture there in the upper left, the group. During my generation, kind of turned back in the other direction. And today, I think we're down there in the center on the bottom. We're kind of a me-oriented generation, our world, our United States. But look at what some people are saying. Robert Putnam says, I think we are on the verge of an upswing. Now let's examine that a little bit further. I'm a baby boomer. We care about health and wealth and quality of life. And your parents are probably Generation X or Generation Y. Very busy, growing up with technology. And then there you are, Generation Z. You're digital. You don't know a day when you don't have a cell phone or a tablet. I've got grandkids your age that I watched them grow up. They knew how to use a mouse, and there are still people in my generation that don't know how to use a mouse. I've seen kids take a book and look at a picture and try to blow it up like this, like you do on the screen. Well, you're the digital generation, but you're different. And here's how you're different. You want to connect. And this is what I think gives me the hope that we're headed back toward a more we-oriented generation. Take a look at that graph on the right side. Basically, this is research done on Generation Z. They don't like the phone conference. They don't like the online chat. They don't really like email or video conferences. Look at the purple. That band of purple. People in your generation prefer the face-to-face meetings, by and large. They're open to connections. As I've said, this is about connecting. And I believe that connections are the threads with which we weave our families, our communities, and our associations together. And this is not Randy Bretz's quote. This is Marshall Ganz. This is something that he firmly believes in. I'll go back to Robert Putnam on the upswing. He talked about what caused us to become more I-oriented or me-oriented. But what is it going to take for us to become more we-oriented? He gives an example, the high school movement. Every one of you has gone to a high school and graduated, right? Anybody in here that did not go to high school? Do you know why we have high schools? Do you think it's because some president years ago said, we need high schools in the United States? No. Do you think it's because Congress got together and voted and said, we need to create high schools in the United States? No. It wasn't because of some great leader that rose up and said, oh, I've called for every town in America to create a high school. It was small towns like some of your hometowns that said, we want our kids to be better educated. And they started creating high schools. And that high school movement actually started in small towns across the United States and grew until it crossed across the entire country. There's not a city in this country that doesn't have a high school today. That is the upswing. One more thing about Robert Putnam. He's taken this to the level of he has created a documentary. It's called Join or Die. If we don't join together, we're going to die alone. And I'd like for you to consider watching that documentary. Here's a short clip of it.
This is Bob. Bob's a big fan of clubs.
I belong to everything. That's my high school bowling team. I'm the tall one in the middle.
And this is a film about why you should join one, and how Bob discovered that the fate of America depends on it.
Harvard professor and award-winning writer Robert Putnam.
You've been described as the poet laureate of civil society.
Robert D. Putnam, for deepening our understanding of community in America.
He made people pay attention to a concept that most people had never paid attention to.
Social capital. Social capital. Social capital. Social networks have value.
I'd like to call on Professor Robert Putnam, who gave us the concept of social capital.
The number of people who know one another's first name, the number of people who take part in community organizations, the level of trust and reciprocity in the community.
The places that have better government are the places that have a long history of social networks and social capital.
Your chances of dying over the next year are cut in half by joining one group.
Bowling Alone. Where'd you get the title?
I happened to run into a friend who owned a bowling alley, and he said, "Gosh, Bob, you don't know it, but you've stumbled onto the major economic problems facing my industry, because although more Americans are bowling than ever before, bowling is up in America. Bowling in leagues, bowling in teams is off by about 60%. Everything that reflects connections with other people are going down. How many times last year did you go to church? Down. How many times did you go to a dinner party? Down. How many times last year did you go to a club meeting? In barely a couple of decades, half all the civic infrastructure in America had simply vanished. It's equivalent to saying half of all the roads in America just disappeared."
Everyone has a feeling something's happening, but then he's got charts to actually show what's actually happening.
Whatever's happening to people's sense of mutual obligation, to their understanding about the common good, to their willingness to trust their neighbor, is no longer going on because people are bowling alone.
The book Bowling Alone, which you're familiar with, by Robert Putnam.
The activity may still be going on, but there's no social capital being built.
That decreases the trust we have in one another. How lonely Americans are, how divided.
You know, he may have been onto something.
We have to see loneliness as a threat to our health security and to our overall national security.
We are trying something that hasn't been done before, which is growing and sustaining a multiracial democracy.
Politics and policy ultimately depends on the social health of our country.
Organization, connections with other people, is the only way you get big change.
Democracy is a pain in the ass. If it was just easy, no one would have to go to a meeting and it would all just be fair and easy. You should join, your kids should join, and if there's not an organization you want to join, create one.
America doesn't have to be the kind of America that you've lived in your whole life. You could decide to change history.
Here's my call to action. I want you to connect with your coworkers, with your fellow students, with your neighbors, with your family. Connect, go across those lines. I want you to consider showing this video. Show it for your team. Show it for your sorority or your fraternity, or call just a group of people together. It's on Netflix, or you can go to their website, Bowling Alone, or not Bowling Alone, Join or Die, and arrange to show it. I'm calling you to action. What I want you to do most of all is to encourage people to connect. Kira. When I got to know her, she was a young high school student in Belarus, and she had great dreams. She said, "I want to come to the United States and go to college." And I thought, oh boy, that's a tall order. But I offered to help her. I helped her write her essay. She applied to the Nebraska Wesleyan and was accepted. She applied at several other universities. She ended up at Stetson University because they offer a better financial package for her. Through that process, I said, okay, Kira, you are so positive about coming to the United States to go to college. You know what? If you do get here, I'll be your American grandpa. And then she applied for a visa. And I thought, oh, I'm not sure this is going to happen. We don't have very good relationships with Belarus. But she applied for a visa. And in July, I got an email from her. Randy, I got my visa. I'm coming to the United States. I'm coming to Florida. So I connected with my friend in Florida, and I said, this young lady is coming. In the process, I thought, I'm going to pretend to be her American grandpa. I need to get to know her parents, and they should know me. So Jan and I met with her parents. That's the picture you see on the left. They don't speak any English. I don't speak any Russian, but we connected through Zoom. Kira was our interpreter. And that picture on the right, that was just 2 days ago, Sunday evening. I talked with her. She has experienced her very first Halloween. Can you imagine that? She also experienced the time change. They don't do that in Belarus. But she said, this is crazy. I was 7 hours behind my parents and now I'm 8 hours. It's really hard to talk to them, find time to talk to them. But my point is, I've connected with Kira and I've helped her, and she is making a difference in this world. And those connections are making a difference. So my call to you is connect and make a difference.